Story 1. I never thought much of it until I moved to a small town. There is something different about people who never left. Many of them married their high school sweetheart, have all the same friends, and never got to know anyone who lived a different kind of life. Their minds are still stuck in high school. Any change scares them. There is also a genuine fear of outsiders here. If you did not grow up in town, you are treated as a suspect, no matter how kind you are. My child's principal was basically run out because he was not one of them. That is all it took. He did not grow up here. He grew up 15 minutes away. Small towns are strange. They can be both wonderful and terrible at the same time. Story 2. It depends on the person. I do judge individuals if they clearly never grew as a person at all. I believe some people need a change in scenery at least for a while to experience character growth. Even then, I judge them more for not seeking out different perspectives than for not having moved from their hometown. It is entirely possible to live where you always have and still seek out different perspectives. Story 3. For me, it depends on whether they continue to grow. If they maintain a closed mind because they have not exposed themselves to different viewpoints and experiences, I tend to judge that, mainly because these are often the same people who are very certain they are correct about how the world works. Otherwise, I do not judge. In fact, I am sometimes in awe that they can remain and become well-rounded, happy individuals who continue to grow in one place. Story 4. The only time I would say I judge is when someone has a very narrow-minded view because they have never left their home. I believe it is essential for personal growth to experience different worldviews and ways of living. It doesn't mean you can't return home after discovering that's where you want to stay. But I think it is important to experience it at least once. Story 5. I notice that people who do not leave their hometowns, travel, or have lived outside tend to be narrow-minded. Story 6. No, but I was judged. I moved to bigger cities and eventually returned to my hometown, where I created a near-perfect life. Regardless, there were always people who seemed bothered by it. Story 7. I did that when I was young and naive. I do not do so now. Most people prefer to live near the individuals and things they know. I tend to judge those who advise others being priced out of their hometown to simply move somewhere cheaper, as if that is the only factor to consider when choosing a place to live. Story 8. Genuinely asking, is it common in America to move away from one's hometown or home state as soon as possible? I see many people online sharing their experiences of relocating to different cities or states. In Toronto, everyone I know who is my age, 22, has no plans to move away. Even people in my parents' age group, early 40s, have mostly stayed in the city. At most, my family and some extended family members have relocated within different parts of the city for better housing prices, but they generally remain in the city or just outside it. Story 9. Not for never moving away, I only judge if they have literally never left. For example, a guy seemed interested, and we exchanged numbers. Turns out he has never seen the ocean, left the state, or even ventured outside the general area. The ocean thing would be acceptable if we didn't live on the coast. It's only about 90 minutes or less to the ocean, and there is even a dedicated bike route from my town to the ocean. That's the type of people I judge. Story 10. I used to, but then I got older and realized how difficult it is to get up and move. There are many factors to consider. There is a reason why most people in the world tend to stay in their hometowns. Story 11. Only the people who complain about their lives. I grew up in a really small town and I couldn't wait to leave. I have acquaintances who stayed and are happy with that life. I wish them the best, even if it wouldn't be my choice. The people who stayed but complain constantly are the ones I judge harshly. They've had over 20 years to adapt yet continue with the status quo. Story 12. Of course not. I wish more of you would stay in your own hometown and stop moving to mine. We are full. Story 13. I did for a long time because not leaving your hometown reveals a lot about a person. However, I've traveled quite a bit and lived abroad extensively. I'm from the United States and have lived in Japan for 2 years, China for 5 years, South Africa for 1 year, and traveled to many other countries besides. In all my travels, what has fascinated me is that despite the differences in our cultures and perspectives, Every single person I've had the pleasure and honor of having a meaningful conversation with eventually reveals that their greatest pleasures in life are good food or drink, good company, and a loving family. I eventually realized that those people who never leave their hometown never go without. To me, that's pretty special. Story 14. Yes, 90% of them are now alcoholics and hang out at the local bar every night. Most of what they talk about is their golden years in high school or their struggles with hard drugs. Many are still living with their parents, which can be a positive thing, but they often act like children, and their maturity seems to have halted in high school. Honestly, I don't think you have to move away forever, but living on your own for a year or two really fosters growth. Another reason why college is great is that we should advocate for change because of how expensive it has become. Education should be made affordable so people can experience it if they want. Story 15. Honestly, I do judge people who willingly choose to remain ignorant. I have a couple of friends who live in their village with fewer than 1,000 residents, which has one pub and one post office. They do not want to socialize with people outside their village. They even have their shopping delivered and order everything from online retailers. They work in the village and have no hobbies beyond watching television and what they can do locally, which basically consists of walking around or visiting the pub. We only see them when we visit their house, as they do not want to leave the village. One of them was raised in this village, while his partner was raised in an equally small village. It is quite frustrating. I try not to judge, but it irritates me when their major complaint is that their neighbor hasn't mowed the lawn this week. Story 16. I am envious of them. They bought homes early, already have good connections, and never have to adapt to a new place. Story 17. No, some people prefer to stay close to family and familiar surroundings. Others enjoy taking risks and exploring. It's a matter of personal choice. Story 18. If people are not curious, I find that I have little in common with them. Some individuals live in the same place but travel frequently. Others remain in one location due to external circumstances, such as limited income, unexpected health issues, or family matters. Some people travel or relocate but do not gain any insights from their experiences. Ultimately, it is about being curious and having a desire to learn. Story 19. Yes, there is a whole world out there beyond your bubble. Go explore it. I know people who did that and then returned to their hometown, but that's fine. At least they tried something new and made an informed decision about what they want. I'm from a very small rural state. People rarely leave here, never try new foods, and often avoid outsiders. It's disappointing. Story 20. Travel is detrimental to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it urgently for these reasons. Broad, wholesome, and charitable views of men and the world cannot be acquired by remaining in one small corner of the earth for one's entire life. Mark Twain. Story 21. I think it depends on the reason. Some people stay because of family, community, or financial reasons, and there is nothing wrong with that. Growth is not always tied to geography. You can evolve a lot without ever leaving your hometown. However, stepping out of your comfort zone, even temporarily, can offer perspective you might not gain otherwise. Story 22. I judge myself for leaving a beautiful, quiet town and moving to a large city that feels like the worst place in the world. Story 23. I try not to judge, but in some cases I do, especially if they speak poorly about people who are exploring beyond the familiar. Story 24. I judge people who have never left their hometown and have never taken an international trip, and yet they talk about politics as if they understand how the world works. Usually, those individuals say things like, America is the best and only country in the world. Let's put 50% tariffs on everything. Story 25. To some extent, I envy them if they stayed because they had a fulfilling life with a strong circle of friends and family that they did not want to leave. Story 26. No, because most of the people in my area are still living in or near our hometown. It is expensive to move and hard to start over somewhere else, especially if you have no family nearby. Story 27. The thing is that it is a recent phenomenon where it is expected that you move away from your hometown. Prior to the 20th century, people lived in the same town for generations and usually under the same roof. In fact, Outside of the United States and some parts of Europe, most people still tend to live in the towns their families have inhabited for years. Story 28. I don't think I'd say I judge them because people should do whatever they want and whatever makes them happy. However, I will say that moving away from my hometown was the best thing I ever did for myself. Transitioning from a rural area where everyone was so similar to an urban center and meeting people from diverse backgrounds taught me a great deal and made me very self-aware in a way I wouldn't have achieved otherwise. You can read about ideas and cultures in books, but until you're around people, you won't fully grasp it. I believe everyone should take a sabbatical and step out of their comfort zones. Story 29. Why would I judge someone for not moving? That seems like an odd thing to fixate on. If they are happy where they are, then that's great. It makes me a little sad when people feel trapped in their hometown and cannot move away without angering others, because that is not living their best life. I would have stayed in my hometown if there had been job opportunities, but there weren't. Story 30. Not necessarily never moved away, but if they've never even left, yes. It's perfectly fine to explore other places and realize you want to be where you lived. It is very different to never leave your little enclave and stay. It also depends on where you grew up. I think for most people, at some point, you need to leave your hometown to open your mind to different experiences. Even if you live in a very diverse place like New York City, you should still leave at some point and realize everything isn't like New York City. Story 31. Yes, because they often stay in their old habits, do not try new things, and do not realize that the world is much larger. Their perspective is often, but not always, limited. Story 32. I still live in my hometown and will probably remain in my home state for the rest of my life. I have close family that I intend to help care for as they get older, which is my choice. I love it here. I appreciate the history, the community, the nature, the arts, and many other aspects that make it my home. However, I still make an effort to travel, experience new things, and maintain a diverse group of friends from around the world. Most people do not care enough to understand the deeper history and culture of the region they live in. While it may be more exciting for many to live in exotic places completely divorced from their own culture, I prefer to explore the richness of my own history and that of those around me. Story 33. Judge? No, but I recognize the differences between their lives and mine. I have moved around a lot and, in many ways, have had a rich life filled with experiences that many will never have. I have friends all over the world and can comfortably live just about anywhere. However, people who have never left have things I did not previously value, such as a strong sense of local community and easy lifelong friendships that do not require much effort to maintain. These are things I now crave and envy. They are just different life paths. Neither is better than the other. Story 34. I used to judge myself for never leaving my hometown, and then I read The Art of Not Giving a F *CK, and one part stuck with me. People who travel and have a desire to explore will see and experience things that others may never encounter. In contrast, those who choose to stay in one area will build relationships and communities, gaining experiences that require a longer commitment to a single place. Neither lifestyle is superior to the other, but you must decide for yourself which path is right for you. Story 35. The only person I would judge is myself if I moved back. It is a personal choice, and I would be disappointed in myself for going backwards. Everyone is different. Some people love it while I despise it. You will never catch me at a high school reunion. Story 36. When you move, you are just relocating to someone else's hometown. Others leave their hometown and move to yours. Why be judgmental about people who stayed where you relocated or moved to your hometown? What I judge people on is their ability to accept that theirs is not the only valid worldview. Story 37. In fact, I hold a lower opinion of those who judge others for such trivial matters. Get over yourself. Story 38. I had a friend with great plans, but she never followed through. She was smart and capable, yet she didn't attend college as planned. Instead, she got involved with an unsuitable partner, took a job at a grocery store, and has been there for 20 years, earning just a little above minimum wage. On the other hand, another person I know stayed in the area, attended a nearby school, landed a great job, and is doing exceptionally well. Story 39. Are we supposed to move miles away? Are we like animals that migrate? What kind of question is this? If people are happy, able to pay their bills and live, why does it matter if they ever moved? Story 40. Yes, I judge my sister on every single thing she does, including marrying her boyfriend that she met when they were 13. Story 41. Unlike many people in this discussion, I understand the sentiment of believing that others never aspired to anything greater than what they already know and never stepped outside their comfort zone. Story 42. I made the conscious decision to stay in my hometown for a few reasons. Everyone says to travel the world to see what it has to offer. I dislike being told what to do, so I chose to stay and witness the passage of time and see what the world would bring me. I've grown and matured. Now I notice that those who were the loudest in proclaiming the necessity of moving away are returning. Story 43. I wouldn't say I judge them, but sometimes I find it surprising, especially in the case of really small towns. There are many reasons why people may not move. For some, it may not be an option financially. Others may want or need to look after family members who live there. Some may be genuinely happy and content with where they are. My experience is quite different. I could not wait to leave my home city. However, it's not as though one path in life is right and another is wrong. Everyone is different, and different choices will be the best decision for each individual. Story 44. All I know is that the people I went to high school with who never left are mostly a group of racist individuals. I am definitely judging that. Story 45. I judge people who criticize others for staying in their hometown. Life is not a competition. Some people simply prefer where they come from. Story 46. You judge them because you are envious that you moved away and still cannot be as happy as they are in a place you disliked. Otherwise, you would not care. Story 47. My brother was married to a woman who completely freaked out when he wanted to move to a city 30 minutes away because she couldn't be that far from her mom. She was in her 30s. You bet I judged her. Story 48. Yes, sometimes. There is a group of people from my school who never left, and they are all still best friends in their 40s. They are very conservative and drink excessively on weekends. Maybe I am just jealous that they do not have kids and can afford to live in Southern California. I moved away for graduate school and find myself in a Midwest lifestyle of my own creation. Story 49. Yes, living in different places is important for expanding your perspective and pursuing a broader range of opportunities. However, everyone is different and should make their own choices. Story 50. I left, they stayed. I sometimes wish I could go back but cannot afford it and would get bored again. They sometimes wish they had more diverse life experiences, but they are rooted. I do not consider my feelings towards them as judgments. Mostly, I wonder if I would have been able to endure as long as they have, and I am sure that I would have eventually left. Story 51. I don't. In my hometown, it is unusual to move away. However, I will be breaking that cycle by moving abroad. Story 52. To be honest, I judged others in the past. Yes, I secretly judged them, but now I know better and don't care. Story 53. No. We should all live where we are comfortable and in a place that we like. If that is in your hometown, then great. If it's not, that's awesome. Story 54. I did when I was younger, but then I moved to an amazing area where many people stay, and I fully understand why someone would want to live here their whole life. Story 55. No, this seems like a ridiculous thing to judge someone about. Some people appreciate where they grew up, and there is nothing wrong with that. Story 56. Why judge? It's their lives. Unless you pay their rent, mortgage, and bills, as long as they're not bothering your home or family, I'm not sure why you feel you can have any input in their lives. Story 57. After reading the Bible for myself, I have concluded that hell exists in your own mind when your thoughts are occupied by the actions or inactions of others. You will not find peace. There are many verses about God's righteous judgment being reserved for him. It seems that the biggest lesson is right there. Let it go. Story 58. I grew up in a small town, left for college, and then moved to a big city. I used to visit home and look down on all my friends who never left. Now, at 50, my wife and I are tired of the traffic, crime, and pollution, and we are planning to retire in that little clean, crime-free town. Story 59. I used to, but I don't anymore. I think I was projecting my own feelings of inadequacy even though I left while they stayed and seemed happier. I would not have reached that level of happiness had I stayed. It's not the death sentence some make it out to be. It depends on the life you lived in that town. Story 60. Not for not ever leaving, especially if their life is good where they are. I do judge people who endlessly complain about how terrible the town is, that there is nothing to do, and that all the people are unpleasant, yet they spend all their money on alcohol, cigarettes, and cocaine in the same 5 local bars while refusing to try anything new and claiming they can't afford to move. Can you tell I know a lot of people like that? Sigh. Story 61. Traveling the world or living in different places does not make someone better or more mature. It simply means they have experienced life in various ways. You do not need to see the entire world to feel that you have lived a fulfilling life. Why should it matter where or how others choose to live? If you are finding happiness and peace without interfering with others, then you are doing well, and I am happy for you. Story 62. Some high percentage of people never move more than 50 kilometers from where they grew up. Story 63. I don't understand why that is a bad thing in any way, especially if you have a large hometown where you can easily pursue whatever you want. Story 64. It depends on the person. Why would I judge the lovely grandmother who has never left the town but is always trying her best to be kind and help others? However, that local individual who never moved beyond high school and says some truly ignorant things? Yes, they are being judged. Just because someone left their town doesn't mean they matured. I know several people who have lived in other towns or states, and I would still judge them poorly because they never gained any valuable insights from the experience. Story 65. Not at all. I believe that people who spend their entire lives in one place miss out on a lot. However, I recognize that I have also missed out on having roots somewhere and feeling like I belong. You cannot have it all. Story 66. Only time I judged anyone for that. She earned a bachelor's degree and eventually a master's in a field that had no jobs in our area. She refused to move or even commute because she wanted to be close to her family, and not just in the same city, but right next to their house. She even stated that she could have gotten jobs in neighboring cities, which would have been a 45-minute to hour drive. Yes, that drive would be difficult, but don't complain that you're in your mid-30s, still working the same restaurant job since you were 17. Story 67. No, because some people want to stay close to their family. Their family is the most important thing to them. Some people want to leave. Neither choice is objectively better. I've had relationships end because my partner wouldn't leave, but I had an opportunity elsewhere. It was a hard lesson to learn. Story 68. No, because I am one of those people. I traveled a lot, both in the United States and to other countries. I tried to grow and learn, but I wanted to stay close to my family who lived on the same farm for 150 years. Story 69. I would love to see more people step out of their comfort zones and explore the world beyond their hometowns. But some individuals prefer a calm, comfortable, and familiar life. After I finish traveling the world in a few years, I will probably settle down and do the same. Live and let live at the end of the day. Story 70. Yes and no. I don't really care what others do, but sometimes I feel like going out and seeing the world or living in different areas, populations, and diverse neighborhoods. I believe it rounds you out or educates you in some way. I grew up in a small, predominantly white, quiet, and safe place, primarily populated by locals and middle-class families. I loved it there and had a great childhood. However, I then moved to the Midwest, followed by the Deep South and then New England. I have lived in both upscale neighborhoods and those that are less affluent. I think this experience has shaped who I am and broadened my perspective on people and places. Story 71. I know a lot of people who never left the hometown where I grew up. They were born there, raised there, and will probably die there. I'm from New York City. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. Story 72. Not really. My girlfriend lives in a city of about 2,000 people, and the only time she lived elsewhere was when she went to college, which was 20 miles away and still in the same county. If they are happy and comfortable there, good for them. Story 73. No, I actually think it's kind of cool if people decide to stay where they grew up. I wanted to leave immediately when I was younger, and after moving around the country, I chose to return home. I can understand why some people might want to stay. Story 74. Why judge when everyone's journey in life is different? I am sure people have good reasons for staying in their hometowns. This thought wouldn't even cross my mind. Story 75. No, I'm an adult. One of the best people I've ever known joined the Marines right out of high school and then became a police officer in the town he grew up in and loves. Why would I judge him? He's probably better than 99% of the people I'll ever meet. Story 76. There are many reasons people choose to stay. Not everyone has the means to leave or travel internationally. I have lived in a few states briefly but returned to my hometown to settle down and raise my family. My parents had significant medical issues, so I needed to be close to them. My in-laws are nearby, allowing my children to see them often. Additionally, the area is affordable, quiet, and lovely. Story 77. I just moved back to my hometown after living in other cities and states for over 10 years. I find it frustrating when people who have moved away look down on those who return home. It's not as if I never left or experienced anything else. I have had those experiences and chose to come back here to raise a family and be closer to my parents. Story 78. Judge? No. But leaving my hometown and experiencing other areas with different food, plants, animals, weather, and culture was the most valuable thing I ever did for myself. Everyone should leave, even if only temporarily. It gives you perspective, speaking as a proud northerner who suddenly learned a lot about the South. Story 79. Not as much as I used to. I used to think, they are so boring with no imagination. They can't imagine being anywhere else except this mediocre place. Now I think, wow, some people liked it here. Good for them. Story 80. No, because everything is a trade-off. I moved to the city, and while I can find countless entertainment options, the person who stayed in a small town will be able to afford a home a decade before I can. Story 81. Nah, you do you. Why should I think my decisions are better than theirs? I believe it is beneficial for some people to experience moving away, but maybe that just isn't your thing. Who cares? Let people live. Story 82. From my hometown? Definitely not. It's a highly desirable city. Other places? Also no. It's not attainable for many to leave. There are too many factors. You can maintain an open mind and still choose to stay. Story 83. Most of the people I went to school with stayed in our hometown or very near. I judge the ones who stayed and talk negatively about those who left, claiming we look down on them. I moved away as soon as possible and became an expatriate, living all over the world for about 20 years now. It sounds cool, but the reality is I still have bills. A job, traffic jams, disagreements with neighbors, and flat tires. Essentially, I lead a normal life with the same day-to-day challenges. I just do it in a new country and culture, starting over every few years while worrying about immigration and visa issues. Most people can't fathom the stress of trying to live a life that could be disrupted if someone in immigration is having a bad day. I always have to have a backup plan to sell everything and move with less than a month's notice. I love it, but it's not as glorious as some people make it seem. I'm not rich and I don't jet off to exotic locations every weekend. I just got lucky and landed in a career that has allowed me to see, experience, and live in many places and cultures. I quickly learned that I can't share my funny stories, complain about the traffic, discuss high rent prices, or tell the latest dating horror story without someone sarcastically suggesting it must be nice to be rich. I no longer bother going back to my hometown. Story 84. The fact is that if you are still thinking this way past the age of 21, you are part of the problem that needs to be addressed. Life is a complex matter that no amount of anecdotal evidence can simplify in this manner. Story 85. Not really. Some people just can't afford to move out nowadays with the cost of living being so high and the stagnant wage situation. I do judge those who clearly peaked in high school, stayed in their hometown, and made it their whole personality, like young men in their 20s who still wear their varsity jackets to local bars and somehow end up at high school parties. Story 86. If they are from a small rural town and have never left, yes, though I am not particularly secretive about it. Why? Because they lack perspective. I have met no one from these types of towns who has truly grown as a person if they never left. Signed, a former small-town resident. Story 87. You should broaden your worldview, but that doesn't necessarily mean moving away from home. Travel, get an education, visit museums, or spend a weekend in the nearest big city. Whatever it takes to broaden your perspective. However, family connections are some of the best ways to secure well-paying work, so it sometimes makes sense to stay in the area. Story 88. This is very specific, but there is a musician, Peter Mulvey, who has a song titled The Whole of the Moon. Story 89. I'm glad I left, and I think the people who didn't explore other opportunities are missing out on a chance to grow. That is not a hidden observation. It is well known. However, I honestly do not think about the people who stayed in my hometown very much at all, nor do I dwell on those who left either. Story 90. People who brag about being, for example, fourth-generation residents of a place are often the most boring individuals you will ever meet. They have never left their town, county, or state and act as though this makes them superior, using it to judge others as inferior. I can't imagine having no desire to live elsewhere, vacation, or explore other parts of the world. Story 91. Yes, to me, that is equivalent to never evolving, like being the type to never grow from chicken nuggets and juice boxes. There is nothing wrong with it, and I occasionally like to indulge in it, but I have grown up. I can't imagine those in small towns who are not exposed to any diversity. That is why many rural communities are stuck and wonder why so many issues are beneath the surface. My opinion is my opinion, yours is yours. Story 92. Only when they speak about things as if they have a personal experience. San Francisco is a difficult place to live. All of Chicago is a dangerous area. There are so many issues in Philadelphia that they block roads. Story 93. No, because not everyone comes from remote areas in the Midwest, USA. Some of us were actually born and raised in decent places with job opportunities and enjoyable activities. Story 94. I do not judge, but I can see a difference in how people interpret different cultures, opinions, and information, often with fear, anger, and distrust. Story 95. There are many variables. I do have something to say. I found somebody else, and it feels different. In 20 years, he hasn't achieved much more than the last time you saw him. I have been around the world and back twice since then. He is the Plico of the aquarium world. Story 96. I don't judge them, but there is some degree of uncertainty. You know how much perspective and wisdom the years give you. That first broken heart is very hurtful and confusing, but each time it gets less gut-wrenching because you know what to expect since you've lived it and have that experience to reflect on. I believe that by leaving your hometown and immersing yourself in a different environment, the amount of wisdom and growth you experience increases drastically. Hometowns don't tend to change much, nor do their cultures, and the people who stay tend not to change much either. By not going out and experiencing life outside of one's hometown, a person doesn't really have a frame of reference for how insular and static it is to live in one place, culture, or environment. So I don't judge them. I don't tend to think about them much. Only on the rare occasion when I visit my hometown and run into someone at the grocery store do I find myself surprised at how two people can be happy with such different choices. There is no lack of respect, judgment, or pity, just a reflection of how different people find fulfillment in different things. Story 97. Do not judge, but feel sorry for them. Growing up, my neighbor had 8 children, and the mother did not work. They never went on vacation. Years later, I spoke with one of them. None of them ever left the state, and most lived in the next town. I have lived in 4 states and visited 40. I have traveled to 8 countries and been to rainforests 5 times. It is incredible what I have seen, while my neighbors have no idea. Story 98. Sometimes, if they are very isolated and do not care about the world around them because they are afraid to step outside and experience more than their immediate surroundings. Story 99. Only if they are talking about how much they dislike it. If that is the case, then they should leave. Otherwise, do they enjoy it? I silently dislike it. Story 100. Maybe slightly. Living in multiple places can really open your perspective of the world. But at the end of the day, it's not my place to judge. Story 101. No, because why move if you don't have to? The only reason I moved is that my career required it. I'm always happy to visit the old neighborhood. Story 102. No, I'm openly envious. Imagine having friendships old enough to drink. Imagine your whole world being approachable in size. Every day is stable and predictable. Absolutely. Story 103. It depends on their work circumstances. If they are working within the town or greater area, then it makes sense. If they are commuting for over 1 hour, then it is confusing for me. Story 104. I do not care what people choose, but I do judge if they are still a difficult person or have become one. There is plenty of judgment there. Story 105. Only if they judge other places, because what do you know about anywhere else? Unfortunately, my brother is like this. He talks negatively about where I live now. He has never been or even visited in 15 years. Story 106. I used to move away as soon as I could. However, about 15 years later, I ended up moving back and realized that it was not as bad as I remembered at 18 years old and that it was much better than many of the other places I had lived. Story 107. I don't care. I only notice when those who peaked in high school cry on social media about being drug addicts, which I also don't care about. Story 108. Realistically, I don't care what others do. I would be miserable if I never left, but if it makes you happy, then more power to you. Story 109. The energy spent judging someone for living in the same hometown can be redirected to improve your life. Story 110. As long as individuals continue to grow personally and do not become stagnant in high school, their progress depends on whether they gain employment, take on responsibilities, and form positive relationships. Attending a secondary school is beneficial, but it is not mandatory. Additionally, the cost of relocating is often prohibitive. I returned to my hometown after living near the capital city due to the high expenses. It simply was not worth it. Story 111. I do not judge them. Everyone's path is different. Some people find happiness, stability, or purpose in their hometown, and that is valid. Moving away does not automatically make someone wiser or more successful. Story 112. I live in a nice suburb of a major city, and when friends find out I live in the same city where we grew up, they assume I still live with my parents. I am 35 years old, so that is not the case. What is it that the young kids say? Something like I am showing off? Story 113. Absolutely not. If the people I know can afford to stay in my hometown, they have done extremely well for themselves. Shout out to the high cost of living area friends. Story 114. Generally, I don't, but I do watch closely the people in the United Kingdom who live only a few miles from where they grew up and act as if they are isolated from their friends and family. Story 115. No, it really depends on where you are from and how comfortable your life is. Not everyone will move and be successful. Sometimes, staying where you are is better. Story 116. It's an unusual concept here. In Australia, it is perfectly normal to spend your entire life living in the same city. Story 117. No, I wish I didn't have to leave my hometown, but I couldn't afford it anymore. I feel more jealous than anything. Story 118. I only judge myself because I allowed my family in my hometown to prevent me from leaving, and now I will never be able to afford to leave this place. Story 119. No, I do not have any strong opinions about where other people choose to live. I just know that I personally could never do that. Being stuck in one place my whole life when there is a whole world feels very claustrophobic to me. Story 120. An idea like that was never in my mind. Why would not leaving their hometown be a bad thing? I don't understand the concept. I do judge a bit if people still live with their parents in their 40s, excluding circumstances such as taking care of them. Story 121. No, but I wonder why they don't want to. I understand that some people are just homebodies, but I can't relate to not wanting to see anything at all. Story 122. I notice when people express opinions about places they have never visited. I have heard many individuals from small towns in the Midwest criticize California, despite the fact that they have never left their state. Story 123. As expected, there are many self-righteous comments from people who act as if they have never judged anyone in their lives. Of course, we have all judged individuals who behave differently from us. For me, perhaps less than you. This question resonates differently depending on your background. I'm from Los Angeles, a place where people aspire to move to rather than leave. However, I have a close childhood friend who, at over 30 years old, still lives at home with his parents, and I do judge him for it. I want better for him, and I wish he would grow up and be independent, but for some reason, he continues to hold himself back. Story 124. There's a part of me that wishes my family had established roots somewhere and that I could have grown up in the same hometown. However, I didn't have that life and moved around a bit when we were kids. Now I'm a few states away from my family in an area where most people have grown up and lived as adults, the locals, and it's surprising how unfriendly they can be. Story 125. As long as what someone is doing is not hurting other living beings, I do not mind what people do with their lives. Story 126. It depends on the individual perspective. The economy there is struggling and the crime rate is high. Many of the people I know who stayed are still engaged in the same negative behaviors they exhibited in their youth. I would estimate that about 70% of my former friends who remained have overdosed, died, or are currently incarcerated. After returning after 6 years, it felt like nothing had changed. In fact, it has only gotten worse. I feel more compassion for them than judgment. Story 127. Depends on where home is and why the person didn't leave. If they live in an urban area, there is usually no reason to leave. If someone is from New York City or Los Angeles, it does not make sense to leave unless they choose to. Story 128. The world is much bigger than your hometown. It would be a shame not to get out and see it. Story 129. I have moved away from my hometown as quickly as I could, but I do not judge others who did not. As long as they are happy, right? Story 130. No, though they never leave at all, including any travel, I do think their worldview can be a bit narrow. It's a privilege to travel, even by car, so I'm not judging. Story 131. I judge those who complain about not being able to afford living in a high-cost city, but make no effort to move to a place where they could have a better life. I also dislike Tracy Chapman's version of fast car. I sometimes receive negative feedback for expressing this opinion, which suggests that many people enjoy the song. However, do you pay attention to the song's message? Move to a place with better opportunities. Story 132. I do not judge them, but I see them as very different from me and not very curious about the world. Perhaps they have different interests or anxieties about leaving what they know or have responsibilities to aging parents or family members with disabilities. Many factors could be at play, and everyone has their own reasons for the life they choose. Story 133. More individuals are moving back home because, despite their success, housing prices are unaffordable. They prefer to return to own a house with a yard instead of living in a condominium, as well as for the convenience of being near their aging parents. Story 134. I mean, if you love it there, I'm happy for you. I just think it's important to see at least some of the world. That doesn't mean you can't travel and still come back home. Story 135. If you live at home after the age of 24 or 25, I start to think that something might be off. However, if you have moved out, that is perfectly fine. The median age for moving out in Sweden is 19, and I often find it fascinating how long people live at home in different countries or cultures around the world. To be clear, I am not saying it is wrong to live at home. It is just not the norm here, and it is considered a minor social taboo. Story 136. There are good and bad ways to live different lifestyles. Moving to a city you cannot afford without preparation is unwise. Living in your parents' basement until your 40s without any aspirations is also unproductive. On the positive side, finding a job in a major city that allows you to live comfortably is beneficial. Taking over your family's business or staying with them to alleviate college tuition burdens is also commendable. Choosing a certain lifestyle is not something to judge. Rather, it is how you approach that lifestyle that matters. However, I do not concern myself with others' decisions. It is more about a general perspective. Story 137. Only people from my hometown, especially when I think back on past interactions when they thought they were impressive. I don't think I would feel the same if my hometown were nice, but it's not. It's very economically disadvantaged. I could not care less about people returning to their hometowns in general. Story 138. No, the grass isn't greener and cities are not ideal. The opportunities are not better. You simply pay more for everything. Story 139. Yes, when I feel bad about my life, I think, well, at least I moved 40 minutes away and don't have a child. So it's more about me than them. Story 140. Most people want to be close to family. My husband and I have lived within the same 10-mile radius for most of our lives. That doesn't mean we haven't seen the world, which we definitely have. Story 141. I don't judge people for not leaving their hometown. However, I will judge someone for being narrow-minded because of it. Story 142. This post was made by the main character of an upcoming coming-of-age movie who dreams of moving to New York City but lives in a small town in the Midwest. Story 143. Not so much secretly, but I have no issue openly telling people from home that if you don't move to at least one new city in your life, you are limiting your growth. It is evident that people who do not seek new opportunities often progress less financially and professionally than those who do. I would also argue that you progress less culturally and personally if you remain in the same location your entire life. I wouldn't say I look down on people for staying in the same town their whole life, but I do expect them to be less successful and worldly than those who choose to relocate. Personally, I cannot imagine living in one place forever, setting aside all other considerations. Story 144. I wish I had a hometown. We moved every few years due to my father's job until I was 11, and it was difficult. I envy the people who have lived in the same area their entire lives. Story 145. I hope people do what makes them happy. That said, I often receive a lot of judgment for moving away. Story 146. I am not surprised that the individuals who stayed are the ones I expected. I hope they are happy. They were not kind in high school and treated people poorly. I know of a few who experienced personal tragedies around the time of high school graduation, and they moved back for more complicated reasons. Several started landscaping businesses, and one became a mechanic when I saw the high school updates years ago. Unfortunately, a few who did not move away passed away in car accidents on the roads they grew up driving, as well as due to addiction, disease, or self-harm. These factors significantly impacted the number of my graduating class that never left our hometown. Story 147. Only if they spent many years expressing their dislike for it and stating they would leave every time I saw them, and a decade later, they are still there. Story 148. I secretly judge people who moved away from their hometown. In my opinion, they represent some of the worst economic and social forces that make modern life miserable. Story 149. Not at all. About 2/3 of people in the United States live in or near where they grew up. It is where you build your life. I see nothing wrong with that. In fact, moving away helped me appreciate my hometown even more. Story 150. I judge people based on their actions. Sometimes, those who never leave their hometown can be unpleasant, while other times they are quite admirable. Occasionally, I find myself wishing I liked my hometown and the people in it enough to stay. Story 151. No, there are plenty of better reasons to judge people than where they are from or where they live. For example, are they disrespectful? Story 152. That is something I have never considered. Most people I know have never moved away from their hometown. Story 153. I don't judge, but there is definitely a significant difference between those who left and took risks and those who stayed in their comfort zone. Story 154. Sometimes the majority of people I grew up with did not, and that isn't fair in reality. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.